And of course, as you know, since then he's been involved with many projects all over the world, in Scandinavia, in Spain, other parts of Europe, and more recently, of course, in the United States. Rafael Moneo is a very unusual architect, really. He's someone who has combined his writings, his teaching, and his practice in an incredibly dynamic and positive way over the years. He's rare among the significant architects in the world who has made such a strong commitment to teaching over the years, and I think that commitment is something that's also, of course, very much evident in the work that he has done in Spain and in the United States. I was fortunate to be one of the members of faculty at Harvard during the time that Rafael was chairman, and I can tell you that it was an incredible pleasure and something that I'll always will have with me in terms of my own experiences of what I learned from him. More recently, as you know, Rafael Moneo was the recipient of the Pritzker Prize, and since then he's gone on and completed more recently 2 projects in the United States, one at Cranbrook, and the other is the subject of the lecture that we will have tonight, which is the Cathedral of Our Angels in the city of Los Angeles. Would you please welcome Rafael Moneo?
Thank you, Mohsen, for your kind words, and just to tell you how pleased I am seeing so many friends and friends who, with whom I worked together in the days I stayed at the GSD, and to see all of you doing the work you do in so many schools. Believe me, that is for me one of the most rewarding experiences. I am very pleased and delighted to talk today here of this project, and I would like to talk of this project as a whole. That means that I would like you see that almost as a case study, because it can be considered so if we think about the subject, such a rare subject and such a difficult subject. We will see so many issues around it, issues that run from my own, let's say, sentimental and ideological commitment with the subject itself, the institution, the city, the donors, the entire procedure for doing the choice of the architect, let's say the weight of the institution, trying to handling all the issues around, from the art to economy. Indeed, this project is a project that is very difficult. Don't be treated as a whole, and therefore I decided to make a presentation that tried to be so comprehensive as possible. I think that religious building today is almost an impossible subject, and I am saying that it's an impossible subject. I think that it was good that these 2 slides are there, because they allowed to me to say something about the world today, a world that it isn't anymore the world, let's say, that produced a rather homogeneous society and homogeneous community that at the end up with the tower of the cathedral, because the entire society end up with a common shared system of values of understanding the world. Obviously, it doesn't happen today. And that means that architects in the 12th, 13th, 14th century and the years before had a much more clear commitment when they ought to do a cathedral. I guess that since the 16th century, since religion, instead of being a rather shared understanding of the entire life, and it became more and more individual experiences, something that produces at the same time the free exam and the school of mystics, that instead of thinking that the religion produces the city of God, the first Christians want it to happen, what has been left is this more problematic sense of relationship of each of us with God, if some, and therefore left in the hands of the architects and in the choice of the architects what a church ought to be today. That means that I found myself with a rather extremely difficult problem, or with this extremely difficult architectural endeavor. Besides that, I ought to say that the 20th century experience of religious architecture has been rather poor. I think as much as the history of 20th century architecture can be written almost like a novel, with a lot of episodes and with a lot of aesthetic struggle that makes history so appealing. When you go into what has happened in the field of religious architecture, the things are much more difficult the story to be counted. I would say, if I am thinking in the churches I like, I would say that ones that always have felt a weakness for is the church of Brickman in Turku, a church of the late 30s. I don't like Alto churches, for instance. I don't think that they are sacred spaces, no matter how wonderful they are. The folded walls in Imatra, I wouldn't say that I feel that as something that keeps the sense of the sacred. I think that something happened, of course, in architects like Asplund and Le Corbusier in Roncham and in La Tourette. No doubt that still remains, or at least for my feelings, of my understanding, one clear example. Recently, probably the church of Marco de Canaveses by Álvaro Sisa is a wonderful church. But unfortunately, we don't have too many hints to think about in the architectural terms when we receive when you receive the call of somebody asking you to do a cathedral. And therefore, I was reluctant when I received a letter from the Cardinal in 1995 asking me whether or not I would like to be considered a candidate to the selection process for the new cathedral in Los Angeles. And that probably also because of my private conviction, having been educated as a Catholic and knowing pretty well after 7 years of being with the Jesuits, I didn't, or as many of my contemporaries, and even more in Spain, I left practice, and no matter I considered myself a Catholic, I wasn't somebody who went to the church, and therefore, having broken the links, even though I kept, as I say, I can't say that I don't feel myself a Catholic, but I feel a Catholic that was not a practitioner. And therefore, I felt myself with all these anxieties when I received this letter. The Cardinal asked us to write and to say something about what, how do you think about the church? And I remember that in this brief note, I told him something that I still believe ought to happen in a church and in a cathedral today, and is the fact that I think that are spaces where it could happen, the rituals, but one should be able to be alone as well. This ability to produce spaces that allow you this dual condition of trying to figuring out those questions that are asking you to be alone, and those others that allow you to be in the company of the others in the ritual, seems to me ought to happen in the cathedral, or ought to happen in a church. And then I left this letter, accepting his request and saying, well, let's see what happens. This letter will have been sent to hundreds of people, and then it will come the selection problems, and we will see. And a month later, I received a letter saying that I had been selected, and if I want to go through into the process, I should send 20 slides. And then deliberately I left the time to run out, and I didn't send the slides. And then I received a telephone call from Kurt Foster that told me, Rafael, there are here a lot of people in the committee that wants to see what you'll be able to do, and I think that you should send the slides here. And because I had the greatest respect for Kurt, that was a friend whom I knew since, let's say, 15 or 20 years, and I didn't want to be unpolite, and I sent the 20 slides. And some weeks later, I received a letter saying that we were 20, and that they were screening those 20 who had been sent the slides. Well, I realized that for some reason I realized that I have entered in a rather dangerous ground by entering in this game. And that happens when some weeks later again I received a note saying that we had been selected 5, and we were Frank Gehry, Robert Venturi, Tom Main, Santiago Calatrava, and myself. And we were called and summoned to LA to see the cathedral and to explain which the conditions of the projects were going to be, and that they wanted to establish contact with each of us. And I went there, and we were not received by the cardinal, by one of the bishops around him, and he received us in the courtyard of the old cathedral, that is in First Street, in the middle of the most degraded downtown LA. And he told us that the site was there, that they wanted to build a new cathedral beside the existing cathedral, that we need to figure out whether or not to turn down the cathedral. And then that because the committee, that was a very large committee, the cardinal had appointed a large committee of almost 20 people, among them a very, let's say, uneven committee. It was James Ackerman, that was this old professor in Harvard. It was Weinstein, who has been the dean in UCLA, urban planner from New York. It was Sylvia Levin, who is now the dean in UCLA. It was Adele Chatfield Taylor, who was in those days the director of the American Academy in Rome. It was one very well-known developer from the Jewish community called Ira Jelin. It was Professor Corso, who was somebody who worked in the Getty, and they were the donors, the two main donors that were Irish Protestant people who have given $25 million each. And then they said that for allowing these people to talk about about all of us and about the project itself, we should do something in relationship and a small shrine to Fray Junipero Serra. Fray Junipero Serra was the friar of the second half of the 18th century, who founded the love of missions in the way from the San Diego into San Francisco. And that was to be located close to the neighborhood of Olvera, that is the Mexican neighborhood close to the Union Station in LA. And that should be done very quickly. That was April, and in May we should have the drawings ready. We didn't see, any of us saw the drawings of the others, and we presented our drawings, each of us independently. I knew what the others did 2 or 3 years later, when an exhibition with all the sketches, all those drawings, were presented in an architectural association in LA. And then Frank Gehry did something that could be described as a version of the scheme he has presented for the church in Rome. Robert Venturi was very, let's say, loyal to himself in doing something like the facade of an Italian church with volutes and all the very literal, or almost like illustrating what the church could be drawn by a boy or by a girl. Tom Main did something much more in his own style, very overwhelming, and the saint did Calatrava. What I did was something different. Let me keep that, and I will explain what I did with the slides that can. But I tried to present myself, I don't know why, but in a more ideological terms, and I tried to offer the shrine rather modest, and yet presenting the figure of Fray Junipero Serra, accepting that he is seen for some people almost as somebody preaching the gospel, by others as somebody that end up imposing the power of a foreign kingdom, what means just the contrary. And then I tried to reflect that in my proposal, and that allowed me to let's say, to offer an ideological substance that probably the cardinal and the committee understood that well, was more what they needed to go ahead into the discussion of the cathedral, which idea was still uncertain and unclear, and therefore to base the architectural discourse in this ideological support instead of an aesthetical one probably was something that acted in my favor. I realized, by some reason, I realized that the circle was being closer and closer around myself, and that no matter my reluctancy, the fate wanted that I did this cathedral. And I said, well, if everybody wants this cathedral, myself to be the architect of this cathedral, I will accept that because obviously I like it to do that. I like it to run to run with these difficulties. I like it the architectural problem it meant, and it wasn't something that it didn't attract to me as an architect. Probably it did it a lot, but I was aware and I was ready to accept that, almost in the terms in which Christ said that he was ready to drink the cup in the olives orchard. Well, then beside that, Fray Junípero Serra was related with Mallorca, that it was something that we liked a lot. At the end, we were selected 3 for the latest interviews, that were Frank Gehry, Tom Main, and myself, the 2 architects from Los Angeles and myself. I thought that Frank Gehry, being involved with the construction of the Disney Concert Hall in the same area, it was difficult for the Cardinal to do the choice of just looking for redundant architect for presenting such disparate programs like that. And I said, well, and then Tom Main, I realized that probably the Cardinal was going to be more afraid with what could be considered very strong, stylistically speaking, proposal, but not probably so ready to deal with the subtleties, with the ideological subtleties that the project had. So I was chosen, and it happens that I found my life committed with Los Angeles. That was a city that I knew, but I didn't know so well. And since then, I have been traveling to Los Angeles almost once a month during the last 6 years. Let me take a couple of images of those churches. This is the church that I like a lot by Brickman. It's a church that enters this issue of nature and God. Is this sense of just, well, the metaphor of light here seems to enjoy this morning light, almost like starting every day the redemption with light. Indeed, it's a chapel that I like a lot. Beside that, the Le Corbusier, where light here happens creating the sense of night. Night is also a very powerful metaphor in the language of the mystics. Men and women are in night, is a truth, the way on the night when you end up discovering God, this God that happens in this sense of light in the dark, something that probably has been experienced also in the Romanesque much more than in the Gothic. I always, and then later, this enjoyment and this sense of enjoying, sharing with the others the same feelings, this sense of religious as a gregarious experience. And then Leverens, that obviously Leverens knew, and the influence of Le Corbusier probably presence in Leverens, still the darkness and the religion as something that provides light and hope in the darkness. And then my proposal, as you realize, compared with this overwhelming object that was the Frank Gehry proposal, was quite a different white in the middle of this garden. That was this garden close to Olvera. Very barely you are able to see there the chapel, and then in the chapel, the image of the friar is going toward almost like an historical person from those that work on the road, and yet they are going to be seen inside the window for those who believe in the gospel as somebody that end up and deserves all the credit for having extended the gospel everywhere in California. And that is something that I have learned from Scarpa. Scarpa did that so beautifully in Castelvecchio when putting this image of the horse, that you see that from away, but the main view happens from inside. And here the site. The site, we started with this site that was downtown. It wasn't this site. When I was chosen in June of 1996, I was chosen to raise the cathedral in the site where the cathedral still stands up. The cathedral had been seriously damaged by an earthquake, and any of those two main donors wanted to spend any money in doing the Duke remodeling. They wanted to use those $25 million that gave each of them to be used, as I said, for a new building instead of just spending in remodeling. And therefore, besides that, the preservationists started to say that they indeed wanted to keep the cathedral, and that whatever was going to be done there, it should be in keeping alive the cathedral. That created a lot of anxiety in both the donors and the cardinal, and then suddenly the cardinal in June or July decided to get rid of the site and saying we will look for a new site. And then in September I went to Los Angeles and we saw 5 sites all around in the downtown. The cardinal kept, that is an Irish American cardinal, he adamantly wanted it to be on the downtown, but we explored 6 sites around it. And all of us, and all the people of the committee that ran around were quite surprised seeing that close to the existing cathedral, the cathedral would be there. Compared with that, it was this overwhelmingly wonderful new or vacant site. A vacant site that has Hollywood Freeway over there, very powerful feature in the entire urban structure of LA, and then Grant Street over there, and then Hill, and then Temple. Here it happens to be the court. Here is the city hall. By far the best of the sites was this one. The other, because it allowed something that I considered to be quite important, that being in the middle of the heart of the city and quite close with all the commitments that the cathedral wanted to keep with the downtown, it happens that it allowed this independence, this autonomy. It was very large, and it allowed to build the cathedral and to keep free space for whatever kind of celebrations and so on. That means that I very much advocated by that, but the cardinal needed to buy that to the city. The city was the owner of this site. And then the city only was able to get rid of the site by an auction. And then it was called by an auction, and the cathedral decided to spend not too much money compared with the entire operation, $12 million in buying this site. And I started to work in this site without having end up yet all the procedure for the buying of this piece of land that has around 300 meters by 120, something like that. from the beginning, and that is very important, I realized, and I like it from the side, from the very, very rough, very sketches, very, very rough sketches, I started to think the site and the entire project from a certain urban point of view. And that means that I wanted to see the cathedral in the highest location of the site. That was called Bunker Hill. That means that is the highest point of the colonial city, of the Spanish city, and therefore I very much wanted to put the cathedral on the top, and then I wanted to keep this space free, some plaza, and then all the facilities, the house or the residence of the cardinal, and some parish center that was needed ought to be there, enclosing all that, almost with the character of a mission, something, and then that regardless all the relationship with the history meant something for me very important, and was the fact that you are going to move from the city into the sacred space with the graduality, with this sense of filtering, of not going abruptly from the door, in just thinking that you purposely and deliberately and with the awareness are moving from the life from daily life into the sacred space that I was talking about. And that and I am going to mix both the built-in with the sketches and with the drawings, with early drawings. That was the very earliest sketch that I, even before drawing no more than those barely sketches that you saw, that is the very first proposal that I did to the Cardinal in November 1996. That means before the piece of land was bought, I met him in Rome and I brought to him that. For some reasons, I realized, I'm sorry, well, it's fine. It's in the other, but that doesn't matter. For some reasons, I understood that if I solved the problem under solving, of introducing a degree of reasonability and just doing completely understandable in terms of urban planning what the entire complex was going to be, I understood that was going to be very useful for me, and that because at the end the piece of land and the sense of the cathedral in the entire city was so important that the success, if some, was very much based in the success in this urban strategy. And therefore, the very first sketches from September to November already showed something like that, something that presents and speaks about the importance to be given to that. And then I said, well, you have the idea of the river, this idea that the highways are rivers in LA, and therefore the cathedral has already his own embankment, and then we are taking advantage of surrounding the site with construction and creating and enclosure that provides protection and that provides spaces for opening celebration. That was what I was looking for. And from the very beginning also, this attempt to maintain something that I consider to be very important, that was the cruciform, and that was as well, it was the orientation. And the issue of the orientation, you are going to be how important it was. This sketch, keep that in mind, probably is later than those that you saw, but this starts to speak about how important was for me the way in which the cathedral was going to be located on the site. And that is a sketch from the beginning of 1997, just 3 or 4 months after starting to think about. It's a bit more elaborated. The cathedral is already there, but this cathedral that wants to be oriented watching east, because I realized, and that was a point where it should be credited to me, that under this point of view I was more orthodox, that the Cardinal himself, in trying to maintain some of those features that seems to me that still have an intrinsic value. If you are thinking in the worldwide communion of religion, as the Catholic religion tries to be, the dust of Rome and the dust of this hierarchical structure that ends up in the Pope, you need to keep that also alive in the church. And therefore, in this moment, I found myself with the difficulty that I oriented the cathedral with the head of the cathedral there, watching east. And then having the entrance from here, I was posed with an architectural problem that was how to solve the issue of entering into the cathedral from the head instead of entering from the foot. That was what normally happens. And then still the couple of slides from the model, the very first model that I brought to Rome, as I said, in November. That a bit more elaborate, a bit later. And then again, all the importance to be given to the way in which the cathedral happens as a piece to be seen in the city. This sense of compound that I was talking about, this sense of the cathedral producing the space not so far away of what the way in which the missions work. Obviously, the missions were enclosure spaces in an open territory. Nowadays, it is an enclosed space in this open territory of let's say, the indifferent city, and yet the city that still, of the cathedral that still keeps his presence at night, in a way, doing from the cross the same double-edged icon that we have seen with the horse of Scarpa and with the image of Fray Junípero Serra. And then the open spaces, the space of the cathedral in the plaza is so important, the way in which the cathedral happens in happens in terms of urban design, that I wanted to start this presentation emphasizing the importance of this urban strategy. I didn't say that the site fell down powerfully from ground into hill, something like 7 meters, what allowed to me to plant the parking garage that happens to be here, parking garage for 700 cars, that end up and that have the exit into here. And from this exit, you go into the main access from there, or another access that brings there into a shrine for the Virgen de Guadalupe that allowed the Mexicans to take this way instead of this other that guarantees the appropriate drainage, the appropriate service for the cathedral from both sides. I would like to enter now into the discussion of the plan itself, because even though the substance of this project comes out from this urban design strategy that I talk about, and that is quite clear into here. You see the residence of the Cardinal with the courtyard, those parish services, the parking garage with the double access from there, and then the exit into this sunken plaza. From this sunken plaza, you go this way, you go this other, and now the plan of the cathedral itself. The fact that I very much wanted this cruciform scheme and this orientation forced to me to figure out how to enter into the church. And then what I did, and what this sketch shows so clearly, was to go through these deambulatories, and those deambulatories allowed to me to display the chapels in both sides, and those chapels, from time to time, you have glances into the main nave, and when you reach there, when you reach the foot of the cathedral, you end up enjoying the view, the epiphanical conditions of the cathedral as a whole. You see there, and let me insist on that, because that is perhaps the most valuable architectural contribution, if some, to this entire project, is to explore this new model or new type that means that you insist in this filtering condition. You move through there, you go into the chapel. We will see how this chapel receives the light. You go in this sense of way, this sense of conquering your own solitude and your own sense of getting rid of all what happens in the world around, and you reach into this point from where you have the splendor of the cathedral scene as a whole. The same happens on the other deambulatory, with the radical difference that from here you are enjoying the garden. I would like to keep something of this sense of God related with the world and with the creation, with nature that happens into there in the courtyard that is presided by the campanile. Instead, this other, the blank wall, I would like it to be, during the years, the witness of what has happened to the people living and using the cathedral. I like this image here that shows it's just the other way, because it's oriented this way. East is over there. You see there the very modest house for the cardinal, the parish center, what is going to be the plaza. From there you go out from the sunken garage parking, and from there you enter into the cathedral. But what I was looking for with this deambulatory asks for something to be said about light. And even though the scheme seems or can't be presented very much in planimetric terms, I think that the section related with light enters immediately after with a lot of power, because this is the deambulatory, and I wanted the deambulatory to be dark, and then the light entering into the chapels. I would like to be this chain of chapels, almost in the way you see then in the treasures of the Greek Acropolis, when the isolated devotions you can serve, and you can move from one virgin into the other, from one affiliation into the other, and then the light enters there from these skylights in the reflecting ceilings, and then this light here, this light that is going to be filtered by the screen here, that is going to go through the buttresses there that are the extension of the footprints of the chapels into providing light into the main nave. And that is what this sketch is going to say. And therefore, this device for providing light into the cathedral is extremely important. And probably it's time for saying something about, I was talking about light, and when we went through the Leverance and Le Corbusier, and we said about night, I didn't want this cathedral to, I wanted the cathedral to be lighted from the beginning. It hasn't to do, no matter that this, probably this cathedral is in depth with Le Corbusier for the apse and for the head open into the plaza. I like it better, a sense of space where the entire space is itself the kind of lamp, the sort where you don't figure it out from where the source of light is happening. And for so doing, I tried to do that and to achieve that in this way. You have there, this is the ambulatory there, and then you have the glass protection there that is out here, and then the screen of alabaster, and then the light that falls down directly into the chapels, and the light that crosses throughout the buttresses and provides light to the entire cathedral. I like it to think in the, let's say, into the Byzantine churches. I like the sense of light that I remember in Ravenna, where at the end you enter in a space that you don't know how light is going to happen, and light happens by the entire body of you have built, and it takes you entirely. It was something that I had been experienced in the Fundación Miró in Palma de Mallorca, that somehow was the building that I have closer to that. There, that is a much more elaborate model, let's say for 1998, 99. It's almost the latest model that allows you to think a bit about the cathedral. You enter, that is the ambulatory of the Virgin of Guadalupe. You enter from there, the chapels that are receiving the light over there, from time to time glances inside the cathedral, and then here you see how the mechanism work, the shop, this profile, Schuert profile that is this glass protecting the alabaster screen, and then the light that at the end is the light of the alabaster that ends up here. This other model presents a very early alternative. It was a moment when I still thought I was going to be able to include in the cathedral a lot of valuable art, and I offered to the cardinal. That was taken by Ellsworth Kelly, and then I wanted to tell to the cardinal, well, we could work out some wonderful vitrail that be done by somebody of the stature of Kelly. Very promptly I realized that was going to be impossible, and therefore I withdraw myself into a more architectural solution that allowed me and that prevented of entering a second-range artists, as a matter of fact, happened in the pieces that were left. Here, the building under construction, we will say something about the choice of the material was very important. That was colored concrete, what gives in a rather direct way, a certain sense of relationship with the old churches, where you feel that the same substance works as well indoors and outdoors. Is a very beautifully crafted, colored concrete. From here, that is the steps that allow you to go up. The building under construction, that I like it. It has been a very rewarding experience, the construction. Models, hundreds of models to work out there. The concrete structure that shows how the light entered into the chapels throughout these openings there, and how it still goes into the main nave. And the same here. And here again, under construction. And here, more the models, how the models have helped to reach rather close the description of the building. These images comes just to show you how close the models were into what the building has been at the end. We used to work with a very gifted craftsmanship hands in the model making. Still under construction. We realized, or I thought, that light in Los Angeles, it comes and flattens almost everything, and therefore we included those shadows that say something also about this concrete construction, and helps to keep the cathedral a bit more sensitive to the light, that we have left that. Here we are now in the ambulatories. It happens by chance, and this time it was a good chance, that the Archdiocese have bought a retablo in Spain in 1934, and we put that at the end of this main ambulatory. Light it is coming. You see the light in the chapels. Each one of these chapels are going to be filled up with some private devotion, and you have from there the views that I was talking about, those glances that allow you, in the meanwhile you are running the ambulatory, to see something of what is going to happen with the main nave. You foresee there. Unfortunately, I don't have any good shot from those chapels, but that is one of the episodes that I liked the most, and I hope they will be used. Here is one of those chapels. We have included here the lamps of the old Santa Viviana Cathedral, the alabaster that comes in some points directly, without this sense of having built something that is enclosed by this alabaster box. That sorry. Bueno. I have lost track. I don't know what has happened to me. Well, here is the other ambulatory. You think that we are in the right? Probably not. But we should be close. I don't mind. We can follow the other way. Not. But let's keep that. Let's go ahead. No, there. I don't know which one. Bueno. Well, that is a section that shows you how the building works. The building has the parking garage that I was talking about, some mausoleum that I didn't design, that was commissioned by the cardinal to somebody who does mausoleums all over the States, an architect from Dallas, just for explaining you the degree of dissociation that could happen, and the lack of, let's say, the cardinal, that is a very intelligent and very devoted person. It isn't the most sophisticated man in terms of visual education. And then he understood that the cathedral should be in the hands of somebody who could be considered by the others as an architect, but he realized that many other things can be done by somebody else. Here, the model of the interior of one of the dozens of models of the interiors of the presbytery with the, and here again, let me see if I think that we have reached. Well, now we are ending in what I consider to be one of the most important walls of the church. We have paid a lot of attention to the side walls, but the front wall, where for some reasons I paid a lot of tribute to the cross, iconologically speaking, and then the cross that works outdoors, as you saw so powerfully in the facade, works also very powerfully inside, where it ends up the roof. In a way, it could be considered almost like the keystone of the roof that has been worked out with steel and wood. I took from Ronchamp directly this soft slope, and the light now works more almost with a Baroque sense of light, the way in which Bernini taught us that and following what the mystic says, that the presence of God could be accommodated with the presence of light. And here, more views of this presbytery. That is the side entrance that I mentioned. We are seeing that from the center of the main nave, where the cross becomes this very powerful retablo at the end of the main nave. And another image of the model there, a model with a rather rudimentary approach to the ceiling. You realize how the process of design is this attempt to get focus and to end up with something that you foresee in a much more rough way, and you need to figuring out how this process, or when this process of elaboration ends up. More images that is probably where the linguistic feeling of the cathedral is felt more clearly in all this folded concrete structure. That is the armature for the wonderful organ, quite wonderfully worked out, but somebody from Iowa. And then here we are in the clerestories that happen that happens running around in the upper floor, that allowed you to see something of the problems with the geometry of the cross. And then it happens this corridor above that ends up in this balcony, that we are seeing the cathedral from the other side. and views with people and the model. Bueno. This balcony that I was talking about, this is a view also from this clear story that I was talking, that allowed you to see how the screen of alabaster doesn't touch the structure, what allowed the entire fabric to be taken and to be included in this alabaster box that is very characteristic for the light the cathedral has. This is a view from the end of this corridor. There, I would like you to, well, to pay attention to the way in which the ceiling touches this system of concrete buttresses, the entrance to the cathedral with this big gate that was the work of an artist from Los Angeles, Robert Grant, who the design and is responsible completely for the gate that was given by somebody and then attached very roughly and very directly there. And then the saint, all those saints are the work of an artist called John Nava. I offered to the Cardinal an agenda of artists to be included that were betting much more for artists like Susan Rothenberg, I thought in a figurative artist, or Martin Purgier as a sculptor, or Agnes Martin for decorating some of the chapels. But at the end, the Cardinal had a quite clear mind, thinking that the art shouldn't create any anxiety in the believers. Here, I told you how much important for me has been the choice of the material with this concrete, very powerful garden steel poured, I hope, and one needs to be humble in waiting gardens to take the appropriate dimension. Here, how the cathedral is seen from both the highway and in relationship with all the skyscrapers of the downtown. Here from the street, how it deals with the sidewalk, how it allows you to foresee what happens. The cathedral with people. I like seeing the cathedral ready to this ritual ceremony of the Mass. As much as I said, I like also to see the cathedral alone, allowing whoever to feel or to do himself or herself all the questions that religion tries to provide answers. Another couple of views. And these two are the last one from the indoors and another outdoors, showing how the cathedral is perceived. I think that if I am intrigued in thinking how it will be seen, let's say, 100 years from now, and not only stylistically, not only architecturally, but also in terms of what it has meant for all those, let's say, communities that still see the cathedral and see this island in the middle of this ocean that is LA as something that keeps contact with the what they believe to be their own identities. I did believe that the cathedral has been rather welcomed by all these people that had felt there for those quite wonderful conditions of the site, and because I believe that we didn't follow the wrong urban planning strategy, are able to see the cathedral and the enclosure of the cathedral as their own house. And I think that with that I finish today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Maybe we could have a few questions. While you're thinking, one thing, Rafael, I'd like to ask you is specifically about the structure, because with the buttresses, you talked especially also towards the end about the way that the roof actually works with the buttresses. But given the way that you were working with concrete, I know that in certain parts one can see the presence of geometry quite a lot. For example, with the way that you're working with the cross, and how that works with certain projections in terms of drawing. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the issue of structure when it comes, because we're also used to seeing the structure playing such an important role in certain cathedrals, and I wonder what you thought about
that. Well, I don't think that this cathedral enters specific or very unexpected structural problems. It's true that it's very much updated at the state of the art in terms of including all the cautions that ought to be taken for the earthquake. And that means that the entire structure has been left floating with the very elaborate system of neoprene drums that could be even changed 100 years from now when the neoprene is crystallized. And therefore, even though the cathedral doesn't, let's say, includes, let's say, sophisticated proposals in terms of structure, I will say that the work that had been done by the engineers deserves a lot of credit, and as much as I had been able to learn, they did a wonderful job. But I would like to go more directly into your answer. And it is true that this isn't a building that does of the structure the thrust and the let's say the substance of this architecture. The concrete is much more worked out for handling the way in which the entire scenography of the light architecture is going to work. In a way, it is much more something that tries to connect you with those memories and with those examples that you still believe that has something to do what you have considered to be the sacred. Under this point of view, what I said is that faithfully, and that is what indeed afraid to whoever is a responsible architect is the fact that those experiences that you have of those sacred spaces, you are trying to transfer that into what you do. And then why for me is better the sense of being surrounded by an atmosphere of continuous light, as I said it happens in the Byzantine churches, instead of this sense of entering into the night. It seems to me that happens both in Ronchamp and in Leverance. For me, it is more the sense of living or providing the sense of a heaven, of something, of an architectural world that could be seen as a strange house, and the construction of this strange house is what matters, much more than just thinking that with your own construction you are building up the Summa of St. Thomas. One of the nicest description of Gothic that I remembered, and I have quoted that sometimes talking about the cathedral now, is when Panofsky says that the Gothic cathedral is the clearest illustration of St. Thomas' Summa. Everything has the strength of a logic that at the end ends up, thus the architectural construction, something that has the strength of a syllogism itself. Here, unfortunately, I think that I am offering what myself as an architect has felt or have learned of as a sense, as a sacred space, and tried to replicate that. And therefore, I don't dare to say that we are building something so consistent as the fabric of a Gothic structure was. But I wonder whether I tried to be loyal to the question you did to me.
So how do you think this project, because you spoke so much about your hesitation at the beginning, not giving the slides, taking longer, and not being so sure that maybe you should be doing this. And now, 7 years later, what do you think? Do you think you did the right thing? How is this project, do you think it's affecting what you are doing now with other projects?
I think that the Cardinal did the right choice. No, I always thought in this, with all my respects to my colleagues, I will say that probably nobody but myself, with all my concerns and with all my reluctancy, was going to be able to figure out what the Cardinal was talking about. I mean, it was a moment when I am not diminishing the value of the Cathedral by Frank Gehry, probably would be overwhelmingly. And yet, it can be said, I don't imagine that very far away from what they are other constructions by himself. And under this point of view, I see not so easy. In other words, and I have never said that, but imagine that it happened a moment when 300 years from now, somebody wanted to transform the Guggenheim in a church, in a Catholic church. I don't believe that it would be so easy. And therefore, I guess that the kind of discourse that I was able to deal with the Cardinal probably has been more fruitful for what has been the outcome that from what happened to the others. I answered half of your question because I have said that I believe that I did a good job for the others. What about for myself? Well, for myself, I will say that I feel having accomplished with what the fate asked to me. And in this moment, I don't know who was so determinant and so adamantly decided that I should be the architect of that. And under this point of view, I think that I accepted religiously the faith. Sí.
One here, one there. Could I get the microphone maybe over here?
Okay, my question is a bit on that subject that you just mentioned, and is at the very beginning you made a statement saying that religious buildings are nowadays impossible subjects, and probably through all the process we went on this lecture and evaluating the achievement of this wonderful building, and probably through the eyes of a Catholic, as you are, through the vision of a Catholic, being myself, it is very interesting to find certain important points in the definition of the project as the whole celebration of pilgrimage and the whole celebration of sense of community in the church, in certain elements like the plaza and the long alleys and aisles in the church. So my question is, referring to that statement at the very beginning, talking about impossible subjects, if so, what is missing to recreate and to reinterpret church in the 21st century to make them possible?
I think that one thing, probably my scrupulous approach shouldn't be such for somebody like Frank Gehry. I am talking about Frank because I have been talking with him very often, and I know that that was something that he will do without questioning himself what you do and what I did. I mean, by let's say, without giving up my own state, my own spirit and my own way of thinking, I am serving, as much as I know, both as an architect and as somebody who understands what all the rituals are and has been into producing this kind of piece, and therefore I have cared in saying that I didn't look forward for this job madly, and yet I believe that probably I did that better that could have been done by others. The fact that I don't believe that everybody is in the same conditions as I am, and therefore I imagine that the faith of the Cardinal is quite solid, and probably some of those, let's say, thoughts that I are fighting with are something that for him are irrelevant, or are something that never has happened. I don't know. We will enter in another problem that is much more subtle, and is should one being convinced or being, in other words, I think that they are very bad Catholic poets, but from time to time they are wonderful poets. When you are taking San Juan de la Cruz and you are reading him, do you think that his poetry can be thought only as the result of his ecstatic experience with God? or art because he was a wonderful poet himself. Probably he was a wonderful poet regardless all his mystic experience. Just the opposite works as well. I mean, they are very devout monks and nuns that try to do religious points and are doing a very bad poetry. I think that who will say, who would speak about the religious feeling of Leonardo or of all those artists that have worked for the church? It was easier for them to see that and to feel that when the homogeneity of the society allowed the people to be included in the main street of the thoughts without being tortured by the feelings I manifested I had. And yet, what I am saying is that from my double background as a Catholic and as an architect, I have produced that, and I have been tried to give some reasons of how I did. And that, believe me, that I think that I helped. For instance, when I say that I have been put there by the faith, I think that it's much better the cathedral oriented to east than just thinking in an assembly-like space as the cardinal wanted at the beginning. My contribution was that. I mean, from time to time, probably I had contributed, even from not such a convinced point of view as a believer, to keep alive something that I am not taking this job just, I have never taken a job to keep alive my office, but I have not taken this job to keep alive my office, believe me, or for nurturing my ego either. I mean, I am, and I have recognized with all of you the fears that took to me and that still take when I see what I did. But I think that we achieved a lot in the conditions and in the intellectual grounds in which a work of Dante had been produced. We are not working with the most sophisticated, intellectually speaking, client. And at this point of view, his intelligence probably has been to look for some architect that could be instrumental for helping him as I was. And under this point of view, I think that my contribution, I think that could match that of the other colleagues. One more. Not difficult. No.
Ask an easy question.
If, I would like better if it wasn't personal.
What's the difference for you between a church and a cathedral? The difference between a church and a cathedral?
A church and a cathedral? Yeah. I think that that is something that probably I should have said something about. I think that you realize the chapels that I like, or the churches that I like, and I put some images there. Some others could be added. Let's say the small chapel of Matisse in the St. Paul de Vence, or some others are always very tiny churches. In a way, the statements, architectural statements related with feelings or with the let's say, the stenographic representation of some metaphor related with the religious experience that is present in those churches that I like it, that you saw that, are always related with almost a single simple statement. The cathedral, let's say that the issue of the scale, the fact that overwhelms the dimension, enters this issue of the large scale that does architecture much more difficult. Therefore, I like very often cathedrals are not very sacred spaces. I mean, if you are thinking the best Spanish cathedrals, nobody will say that are sacred spaces. I mean, if you go into Toledo or Sevilla, or you go into St. Peter in Rome, there are spaces that have a public expression of what the institution has been, or how present the institution is in the society. But it doesn't enter this sense of, let's say, representation of religion's feelings that are able to be achieved in a small scale better than in the large one. I think that in more administrative terms, probably a cathedral is where the bishop resides, and the bishop is mastering a collection of communities, and therefore it has something of this sense of the public. And I would like to see this cathedral. I like that this cathedral is able to be felt walking. That means that you are somehow sharing this experience of a space that doesn't ask you only to be in a static condition. This sense of walking in a space is something that happens mostly with large public spaces. Architecture that allows to walk is an architecture that states of the domestic condition that very often has churches instead of cathedrals. Is probably a distinction that I should have done. This for well, helping you or helping the audience to understand the difficulties of this large scale. To do large, just being young architects, I think that it's better to work in small scales than in large scale. It's easier to do architectural statements in a small scale than in large scale.
Maybe one last question and then that could be it. Yeah? Okay. Can we just get the microphone because there are people in other rooms so they can't hear. Can we get that?
First, thank you very much. It was a beautiful lecture. The question is, can you see a link between the Museum of Roman Art and this cathedral?
Well,
Is this
I think that
maybe you should clarify that you are talking about in Merida. This is another project.
No, I mean particularly because I can see some link, but I wonder.
Rafael's other project, no?
Pardon?
You mean Rafael's project? Or?
Not the one that he did in Spain.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You should say because people might.
Sorry.
well, no doubt that to think in architecture just in terms of displaying when walking, that would be the oversimplification of the Le Corbusierian statement of promenade. I would say that in this case, I would like to see the other way. I mean, I am not displaying the collection of architectural events just as the elements of a landscape. Architectural promenade has been related from time to time with gardening and saying, well, you are putting that and that and that, and when you are moving, you are enjoying when moving that. I think that in this case, that is an architecture that allows and resists walking in. It's true that also has a condition of filtering in a rather normal or normative condition for going into, that is the ambulatory, from where you move in. But I wouldn't say that the object and the architectural fabric at the end ends up as the result of this movement. I think it provides room for walking and for procession, but it hasn't been the procession, the way of displaying the architectural elements in the space.
Okay, Rafael, I just want to thank you for a wonderful lecture and a great building. Thank you very much.
Next time we will talk of architecture instead of myself.